Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Thank you everyone for coming to our collaborative program with the Alim. I hope all of you guys are doing absolutely fantastic. Inshallah, we do have a full night ahead of us where we'll have our esteemed scholars discussing the topic of prophetic advocacy. Before we begin though, we'd like to start as we always do with Quran recitation. So if I'd like to call the Quran reciter to the front, inshallah, to begin.
Second time. Tell us your name. Introduce yourself, sis. Good morning.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Allahu Akbar. You're not going to give us your name?
Al-Abd al-Faqir ilallah.
MashaAllah. Brother Diyat will be doing our Quran recitation today. Allah Habibi.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم محمد رسول الله والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم تراهم ركعا سجدا يبتغون فضلا من الله ورضوانا سيماهم في وجوههم من أثر السجود ذلك مثلهم في التوراة ومثلهم في الإنجيل كزرع أخرج شطأه فآزره فاستوى على سوقه يعجب الزراع ليغيظ بهم الكفار وعد الله الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات منهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khairan, Diya, for the beautiful Quran recitation. Tonight's program is about the idea of prophetic advocacy. Our Shaykh are going to be discussing what that is, where we've seen it in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as and how we as activists and advocates of change can model our activism after the life and actions of the Prophet ﷺ. With us as a guest is Dr. Sherman Jackson, the King Faisal Chair of Islamic Thought and Culture and a professor at the University of Southern California, as well as a co-founder and board member of ALIM, the American Learning Institute for Muslims. ALIM is an incredible organization that serves our community in developing young leaders through their educational institute, inspirational and academic programs, and social events. Alongside Dr. Sherman Jackson is our very own Shaykh Tariq Musleh from the Mecca Center. Without further ado, we will begin, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Begin as we always do by praising Allah Azza wa Jal and thanking Him. We thank Allah Azza wa Jal for the blessing of this moment, the blessing of this hour, the blessing of this masjid, the blessing of this community, the blessing of our teacher and our mashayikh, the blessing of every moment that we remember Him. For every moment we remember Allah is a moment that we could be in forgetfulness. And yet even our ability to remember Him is a gift from Him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His most peaceful of peace and most blessed of blessings upon our teacher, our leader, our master, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And in this blessed hour of answered and accepted dua, we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us from those who are granted the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam in the gardens of Jannah. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To say that this moment is special is an understatement. Dr. Sherman Jackson is no stranger to our community, and while I love my brother Nader very much, even to call him a guest is out of place, because Dr. Sherman is in reality a cornerstone of our community and a part of how the Mecca Center has reached where it is. It is through his students and through individuals like myself who have learned from him and benefited from him, his books, his works, that alhamdulillah our community is where it is at. And so we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless our beloved Shaykh Dr. Jackson, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward him and to invite him to the Mecca Center more and more. Once a year is not enough, Shaykh. This is like we're going to file a complaint. We want to have you more and more and more, inshallah ta'ala. It's not sunny California, but it's home. It's the Mecca Center. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll show you some of that Mecca Center hospitality. And yet, Dr. Jackson never only represents himself, he always also brings along the team of alim. And alim have done really a historical job in, alhamdulillah, providing education and literacy to Muslims across America and even across the world that is grounded in our tradition and also relevant to the times and places that we live in. And so we welcome Dr. Jackson. We also welcome our family and friends from Alim. And we ask Allah Ta'ala that the partnership and collaboration between Alim and the Mecca Center be one that extends until the end of times. As we sit here, though, we must recognize that part of what we benefit from our teachers is the ability to traverse through some of the tumultuous times that we face. And no doubt, our community, over the past year and many years before it, we have witnessed some of the most unsettling, problematic, and challenging times when it comes to injustice and oppression. And we have witnessed images and sounds that we never even thought possible. And the reality is that this is a time when the believer can either lean into their relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal or lean out of their relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. And it is easy at this point of time to find ourselves in a state of internal chaos with a level of spiritual, perhaps, negativity and pessimism and in our outlook towards faith and in our outlook towards ourselves. And so one of the things that our tradition invites us to do in these times of fitan and trials and tribulations, as we witness what is happening across the world and across our country, and even here locally in Chicago, where just last weekend over 100 individuals were shot as a result of gun violence. So this is violence upon violence upon violence, injustice upon oppression in so many different layers and forms. And our tradition tells us that this is a time that we retreat to our faith, we come back to our centers, and we find our teachers. And so alhamdulillah, we're very blessed to have one of our senior teachers, not a reflection of his age, of course, because that swag doesn't mess around, mashallah. The Shaykh always comes ready to impress. But Shaykh, as the longest introduction that I've done in a very long time, all of this to say, Shaykh, it has been unsettling, it has been difficult, it has been heartbreaking, it's been challenging in more ways than we can describe. And we keep finding within ourselves hope through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we say that we want to advocate in the way that is most prophetic. Can you, Honorable Shaykh, can you please define for us what the term prophetic advocacy even looks like and what it really means?
الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي وقني شر نفسي وفلت لساني من أضل أؤذل بغير حق رب العالمين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.
I want to start off with just a couple of comments. First of all, I want to congratulate you, dear Shaykh, and the community here on such a beautiful building. I just got the first opportunity to go downstairs to the wudu room, and I just witnessed just what a fantastic building this is. And I know that that might sound like, you know, something of a superficial statement, but I think that one of the things that we don't do enough of is recognize and be thankful for the ni'am that Allah has granted to us. And I think that those kinds of blessings should be amplified in the present context, because there's lots of Muslims in lots of places all over the world who don't enjoy the kinds of things that we simply take for granted here. So that's one of the things I want to say. The second thing I think that I want to say with regard to,
You prefer this?
No. Is this okay? whatever you want, inshallah. Wow, now
That's good, Shaykh. That's good. We like that.
That's good?
Yes, we like that.
All right. Yeah, I haven't gotten excited yet.
Then he moved away from the mic.
Yeah, I haven't gotten excited yet, so you might not like it. But anyway, the second thing I want to say is that, you know, these conversations, as you said, we're living in some very difficult times. It's almost as, you know, as Allah says, you know, in the Quran, you know, ترى الناس سكارى وما هم بسكارى ولكن عذاب الله شديد. These are unprecedented times, and I say that not only from my perspective as a Muslim, but from my perspective as someone who's grown up in this country and seen a shift in the basic culture of this country and the way that people can or cannot communicate with each other. We're living in some very difficult and some unique times, and I think that from a Muslim perspective, I think one of the first things that we have to do is to go back to what Brother Diyat recited in the verses that he recited. Muhammad Rasulullah waladina ma'ahu ashidda'a ala al-kuffari ruhama'u bainahum. Ruhama'u bainahum. And I say that because oftentimes we find ourselves in circumstances where there is no clear answer. And if we don't recognize that we are all striving for the same thing, inshallah, all striving to reinstate the dignity of Islam in the world. And while we may have different perspectives on the best way of bringing that about, we have to keep that rahmah among us. I think that one of the things that's clear to me, and it's been clear for some time, and this is one of the things that's different now. I mean, it's even different. It's in some ways even worse now than it was just after 9/11. I know some of the people in here weren't around at that time, but I was. What we find now is that for Muslims to stand up to speak the truth about issues that are not simply political, but a matter of conscience. How do you expect anyone of conscience to sit back and watch what's unfolding and say nothing? And yet the people who come forth to address these issues are themselves brutalized, not physically, all right, but in terms of their jobs, their positions, their sense of security, their reputations. And so what we're finding is that there's a world out there that wants to make life so ugly for us that we withdraw. And when we withdraw our critique. And when we withdraw our critique, the situation that's going on goes on unaddressed. That's what they want from us. And one of the things that I think that we have to realize is that we have to be our beauty. We have to be the ones who restore a sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, belonging, and dignity within our midst. We cannot become our own worst enemy. And I know that, you know, it's part of the psychology of groups, and we learn this even in certain verses in the Quran. You know, in Surah Al-Qalam, where Allah talks about how, you know, that there's a group who, to make a long story short, they conspire with each other to deny the poor and the needy any access to their crops. And so Allah destroys their crops. And so when they come in the morning to visit their crops, they find that they're destroyed. And Allah says one of the first things that they do when this outside affliction hits them, فَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَلَاوَمُونَ. Some of them approach each other in blame. We start to blame ourselves because we can't figure out an ipse-dixit answer to the problem that's facing us. We have to find ways of resisting this. Because all that does is the same thing that they're trying to do us out there. That silences us within our own community. No one wants to say anything if all they're going to be is beat to death emotionally and psychologically. So we have to try to find ways of resisting that impulse. With regard to prophetic advocacy, I think, first of all, we have to start out with the principle that qunut, hopelessness, is not a virtue in Islam. We never lose hopelessness, no matter what the situation may be. And part of that hopelessness is a reflection of our having lost the ability to believe in Allah's power of intervention. And that's one of the first things that is sacrificed when religious communities begin to lose their way. They lose their ability to believe even in the power of the miraculous. And if I can speak from a slightly more personal perspective, I mean, I'm a convert, so I know the power of Allah's intervention, not only in my own life, but in the lives of many people that I know. People whom no one else could reach. People, when you find out that they're Muslims, it's almost unbelievable. And so I think that we can't lose our ability to believe in Allah's power to intervene. And you're going to talk about prophetic advocacy. I mean, just ask yourselves, given the odds that the Prophet was facing, and, you know, not, my students here are going to start rolling their eyes because it's something I tell them in theater class, but not sitting here today looking back at all of the accomplishments he made, but going back to his time, looking forward, not knowing that he was going to have those accomplishments, not knowing that he was going to have those victories, and yet somehow finding the ability not to be paralyzed by the circumstances that faced him, not to be paralyzed by the overwhelming odds that he faced, and to be able to persevere despite those overwhelming odds. This is somebody who has contact still with Allah's power to intervene. Otherwise, he would not have been able to get out of bed in the morning, so to speak. So I think that's one thing. The Prophet never lost hope. Second, I think that, you know, we have a challenge here in this society, and part of that is to transform this society so that the kinds of things that are going on now, and I mean the callousness, the lack of morality, the lack of conscience that can allow something like what's going on in Gaza to go on. I mean, with barely batting an eye, knowingly, and not only to allow it going on, but to actually add fuel to it, to enable it, all right? To provide the means to carry it out. That speaks to a mentality, all right? And part of our charge here has to be, how do we figure out to transform that mentality? And again, I know that as Muslims, you know, we don't think that we have the ability to do that. But let me try something on you that I expressed to my students in Ireland. I hesitate to share this, but
don't hesitate, Shaykh.
But I'm going to seek your permission.
It's all you. This is your family. This is your home.
If we think that we are a little helpless, tiny minority that has no wherewithal, we have no ability to affect the mentality, the culture, the psyche of this country. All right. Look at certain communities over the last 30 years. Small, tiny communities. I'm talking about the LGBTQ community. All right? What you're looking at today is the result of the last 30 years or so. No more. Before that, it would have been impossible to think of some of the things going on today that are going on today. And that was a small, tiny community that pooled resources, that figured out what the pressure points were, that coordinated their efforts, and ended up where we are right now. We have to be the people who are able to do the same thing. We have to be able to coordinate our efforts. We have to be able to acquire a common sense of mission. And we cannot allow our periodic failures, all right, to take us away from the mission that we're on. So I don't think that we should be hopeless in this regard, all right? And because it doesn't happen today doesn't mean it won't happen tomorrow. We have to persevere. Now, getting a bit more granular, I think a couple of things. One, as I said, if we're going to be able to exercise any influence, we have to be united. Well, it's just that simple. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but it's a fact. I can't change it as an individual. You can't change it as an individual. We have to figure out how we're going to unify, how we're going to identify what our mission is, what our priorities are, and how we're going to pursue them. All right? And for that, we have to understand that it's not going to be just the scholars. That's a major, I think, oversight that we often make. Everybody in this room has their role to play. Everybody in this room has a role to play. All right? When you look back at the career of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there are Sahaba, some of whom you've never even heard of before, played major roles. They weren't the most knowledgeable, they weren't the most known, but they were a part of a mission, and they made their contributions. And part of what we have to do is we have to distribute this mission to everybody so that everybody's involved. And I mean that very seriously, because right now it's almost as if, well, let our scholars and our leaders go out and do it for us. The brother mentioned that Alam is a program, you know, that's training leaders in the country. I like to think that Alim is training more than leaders. I like to think that Alim is training followers as well.
Allahu Akbar.
I really like to think that Alim is training followers as well. We don't get anywhere with just leaders. With no followers, we're not going to get anywhere. I think that prophetic advocacy, first of all, I think that, like the Prophet, we have to recognize what is good in our society and invest in that. Just like the Prophet did in Arabia. All right? The Prophet is in a society that's an idol-worshipping, pagan society. And yet, he was able to identify what was good in that society and invest in that good. Second, we identify what is bad in the society and we try to eliminate it, but we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. This is a major mistake that we tend to make. And I'm a little shy, I mean, maybe it's the times we're living in, because the one thing I don't want to do.
Shaykh, I have like a list of controversial questions, so this is your space.
Oh man, it's that time. What I was going to say is that the one thing that I don't want to do, especially in the present context, is add to the anxiety and the stress of the Muslims.
Right, but I think addressing it is how we work through that.
Okay,
anxiety.
all right. Well, he said it. I think that. I mean, if we take Islam in America, for example, one of the egregious mistakes that we made with the Nation of Islam, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. They had a wrong aqidah, we trashed the whole thing. They had a great infrastructure. They had a great social program. They had a great program for reforming individuals in the penitentiaries, in the streets, all right, in the schools. We threw the whole thing out because we didn't agree with the aqidah. And once the whole thing was thrown out, the whole thing was thrown out.
Shaykh, can I
And
ask
you can't just put that back into place. That's Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so one of the things, subhanAllah, that's a perfect example. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and reward you, Shaykhna. One of the things, Dr. Jackson, that I heard you mention before is that we tend to be a very reactionary community.
Yes.
Whereas the prophetic model is very strategic. Like you just think about the Prophet ﷺ and the cave of Hira. All that time, assessing himself, assessing the community, assessing his family, assessing the ills of society, like you mentioned. And then there was a strategy given to him by Allah. How do we pivot away? Because I think that reactionary community, as much as we're critical of it, it's typically reflective of like inshallah ta'ala, a sincere community, a community that means well. But in the process of being reactionary, things like what happened with the nation happened, where in the process of saying, oh my God, the aqidah is completely wrong, we threw out the baby with the water, right? So how do we pivot away? And in the name of prophetic advocacy, we're walking some very complicated lines, some very complex situations. What does it mean for us to be more strategic and less reactive on an individual level and on a community level?
Wow. Well, I think that, first of all, we can only be strategic when we have a clear sense of mission. Strategy is a means of going from one point to another point. But if you have no mission, you have no direction, there's no such thing.
Right.
Reactionaryism is just a matter of survival. All right? Someone else has placed you in this situation. All right? It's not your situation. You did not choose to be in that situation, and all you're trying to figure out is how you want to survive that situation.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that we have to move from is a survival mentality to a building mentality. What is it that we want to build? What is it that we want to see beyond simply surviving as a community? And I think that, quite frankly, to be fair to the community, there's quite a bit out there to react to.
Right.
All right? But reaction cannot be our only impulse. We have to get clear about what it is that our mission is. What is it fundamentally, primarily, that we want to realize? And if we go back to the mission of the Prophet ﷺ, it is that we want to establish a proper relationship between the people and Allah. That is our primary mission. Now that may take many different manifestations, but we have to understand that if we're going to be prophetic in our mission, that is our mission. That was the Prophet's mission. And because of that, he could prioritize. He could sacrifice this. He could put up with that. I mean, if you look at something like the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, for example, I mean, they wouldn't even acknowledge him as prophet. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. No Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Okay, fine. Why? Because I have a bigger mission. All right? There's a bigger priority here. Okay? I want this peace treaty.
What does that look like today? What does Hudaybiyah, those are very powerful examples.
Yeah, but you see, this is what I'm saying, Shaykh. We're here in Chicago, all right? New York is something else. Philadelphia is something else.
Right.
California is something else, all right? Do we have a sense as a community? Now, if we want to talk about the Chicago community, I would have to be here in Chicago to tell you what that is. I don't know. So we're talking about, sort of at the 30,000 foot level.
Right.
Otherwise, we're talking about a communal level, and I don't really know the communal reality.
For sure.
Here, all right? But if we're talking about a national level, all right? Do we have even a national conversation among ourselves as Muslims that would put us on the same page? And if not, I don't know how we get there. I'm involved in something right now that's an attempt to do that.
Okay.
All right? And part of what we have to achieve is the ability to have civil conversations about very difficult issues.
Right.
Very difficult issues.
Right.
Anybody who tells me that they know all the answers to what we need to do right now, have a nice day.
They definitely don't have the answers. If they think they have the answers, then
that's
they
right.
definitely
They definitely don't.
Right.
But the answer's going to come out of our collective attempt to figure out what we're doing.
You know what, Shaykh? There's also just a lot of noise, right? There's just a lot of noise.
There's going to be a lot of noise because there's a lot of frustration, understandably so. And we have not understood that noise alone is not going to necessarily change the situation.
Do you mind if I give you some of that noise as maybe an example that we can walk through?
All right, I was going to go through my other things, but go ahead.
For sure. And then definitely, please forgive me, Shaykh.
No.
I'm just taking advantage of the situation. So let's use, let's take an example of prophetic advocacy as something that's being navigated, and something like, for example, not too long ago we saw a lot of our youth responding to the encampments that were taking place. It was an interesting time. We had youth who were really stepping up to the plate and challenging their universities and calling out really systematic issues within educational institutions that were supporting all sorts of injustice. And we, within the Muslim community, we saw a lot of different responses, and we saw a lot of really trying to find an appropriate response that aligned with our values, but was also, in the long run, something that benefited our Muslim community on an individual level, with parents coming and saying, listen, I just put my son through college. He's in his final year and he's about to be expelled because of this. And at the same time saying, you know what, we have the privilege and the opportunity to represent individuals whose voices have been shut down. So the complexity of that situation, just as an example, is one of those times that for many of our brothers and sisters, young and old alike, responding prophetically felt particularly challenging, and walking this fine line of representing the Muslim community while also being able to...
I'm trying to figure something out.
Yeah.
Since when is responding prophetically not challenging?
Allahu Akbar.
Since when? Uthman wasn't challenged? Abu Bakr wasn't challenged? Uthman wasn't challenged? The Sahaba weren't challenged? Look at what some of these people went through. And this is part of it. They went through it because they had a mission. We cannot imagine. And by the way, let me just say this right now. I hope Allah don't choose me. I don't want to have to be the one to sacrifice. But if He does, please Allah, give me the ability to sacrifice. Because we are not going to get beyond where we are with no sacrifice. And this is a part of the problem that we have. We are so unconnected to our tradition. And I'm not talking about the tradition of the madhab and this and that and the other. I'm talking about to our Prophet and to his companions. We are so unconnected to that we actually think that we're going to be able to execute his advocacy with no sacrifice. Where? When? The hijrah alone. Do you have any idea what that entailed? These people left their homes, they left their properties, they left spouses, they left family. This is not Amtrak. This is 250 miles in the heat. Not knowing. And by the way, you see, it's easy for us to think about that now because we're here looking back. What do you think some of these people were thinking as they're on their way to Medina? They're halfway there. What do you think they're thinking? What the heck did I get myself into? You can't imagine that some of them didn't think that. And yet they had to persevere. All right? Sacrifice is a part of this deen. I'm sorry to deliver that message. Sacrifice is a part of this deen. And it doesn't have to be my job. Sometimes I just have to sacrifice my opinion.
Allahu Akbar.
All right? Because by insisting on my point of view, all right, I'm going to cause more disruption, more dislocation than that's worth. All right? What good does it do me, Shaykh, all right, to have a debate with you and then I win the debate, but the entire community here is destroyed? What good does that do me? So I may have to sacrifice my point of view, all right, in the interest of the community, in the interest of the whole. And I'm not talking about anything that's fundamental, all right? I think we should go this way, you think we should go that way. All right. So I think that part of the problem is that we think that we're going to be able to get out of this with no sacrifice. All right? Just think about this. Think about one person. Think about Muhammad Ali. What did he sacrifice? What did he sacrifice? Virtually everything. Virtually everything. All right? And he did that as a member. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, I was never a member of the Nation of Islam. I just want to let you know that so that you know this is not some good old days kind of perspective. All right? But he was able to do that as a member of the Nation of Islam. And he was able to say publicly, I'm ready to die before I abandon that. We will not get there without some sacrifice. And I'm not saying that I'm not putting any premium on sacrifice. You know, some of us think that, you know, it's good to walk on hot rocks. All right? Our Prophet taught us never wish for battle. Don't wish for it. But if it comes, handle it. All right? I want to avoid unnecessary sacrifice. I want to avoid sacrifice that may be greater than I can bear. But I also want to be able to make the sacrifice that I need to make. And as I said, I hope Allah doesn't doesn't test me with that. But if he does, I hope he gives me the ability to stand up to it. But the very idea that there's going to be no sacrifice, I'm not sure what prophetic advocacy that is. Personally.
And I think
maybe that didn't answer your question.
No, it was spot on, absolutely spot on. And I think that the idea of facing adversity and being ready to make sacrifices, it's a pattern that we witness from day one of the Prophet ﷺ's legacy until the very end of it.
To the very end.
And the Khulafa carried it on as well. And part of I think what makes it difficult is not only understanding what sacrifice looks like, but it is about learning to kind of navigate those complex matters like Hudaybiyah, right? We just think about, for example, the response of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu.
That's right.
Alasna ala al-haq. Are we not on the truth? Are we not on the truth? What is this compromise? And sometimes today, within our community, we have those who make that voice. Are we not upon truth? Within our community are also those that are willing to kind of cash out on, the opposite extreme as well.
That's right.
And so that I think is something that perhaps, Shaykh, if you can enlighten us, Dr. Jackson, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and honor you, about what it means to have not just those conversations with the broader community, we'll get to that in a little bit, but even within our community about really understanding what it means to navigate those complexities like Hudaybiyah.
Yeah, I think it's really a matter of quite frankly, Shaykh, I think that I'm getting nervous because I don't want to disturb.
Shake the boat.
No, I don't want to disturb anybody's. But I think that we are a lot more quote unquote sort of westernized and modernized than we think we are. And some of that we even read into Islam. And what I mean by that is that the actual example of the Prophet is not our point of departure. Our point of departure is what we are taught in our schools, in our educational systems, in the surrounding culture. That becomes the prism through which we read, through which we learn about our Prophet. But that's coming from there to there. We need to go from there to have that which shapes our vision, and have that shape how we look out at the world. By that I mean this. If we start with the legacy of the Prophet, all right, you will see compromise all over the place. You will see differentiated ways of distribution all over the place. We have, for example, no justice, no peace. Right? How many people believe that? Oh, no, they're not gonna raise their hands. All right.
They come.
No. I don't. It's not that kind of party. But most of us have that sentiment, do we not? How many times did the Prophet compromise justice? When they said, "You're not coming in here this year," they won't even let him make pilgrimage. Won't even let him make Umrah. This is a pan-Arabian right for everybody. Was that just? Was that just for the Prophet to accept that? Why did he accept it? Because he had a broader interest. When you have a sense of mission, all right, you can prioritize what it is that you do or don't do. When you have no sense of mission, it's like that. Is this making sense? All right? He could prioritize. I want to get into Mecca. I want Arabia to see us as Muslims making the pilgrimage like everybody else. Because when they see the Muslims making the pilgrimage like everybody else in Arabia, they will understand that they can be bona fide Arabians and be Muslims too. I have an interest in this sacrifice, so I can make it. All right? When the Prophet goes to Bani Thaqif, and he's victorious over Bani Thaqif, he gave people like Abu Sufyan and all these Meccans all these spoils, gave the Ansar what? Nothing. Was that fair? Was that fair? You see, that's what I'm saying. We have this fairness notion in our mind. We can't even read our prophet because we're clashing values. See what I'm saying? We know what he did, but they're telling that wasn't fair, but he can't be not fair. He gave what he gave because he had a mission, he had an interest. He had an interest to serve. All right? I'm about to die. I want to ingratiate these people with Islam. I want to give them a sense of ownership in this deen. They will not defend something that's not their own. I want to give them that while I have time to do so. So I can give them this, and I can give them nothing. And then I can explain it to them why I'm doing it. And what do the Sahaba do? They cry, but they get it. And so if the Prophet's legacy becomes the basis upon which we're having our discussions, I think we get a lot farther.
And I think, subhanAllah, even just when we think about this definition of victory, right? It goes back to that mission that you mentioned, that mission of really having, the Shaykh, Dr. Jackson, Hafidahullah, he described the mission as letting people to get to know Allah and submitting to Him, exposing them to knowing Allah Azza wa Jal and submitting to them, or giving them the opportunity to choose to submit to Him. And if that is it's almost like a world view in a sense, right? It's
that's what a sense of mission is.
Right. Yeah. And I think you reminded me of something, Shaykh, I think I mentioned before here at the Mecca Center, I have a relative who has family in Gaza. And I visited him, and it was after he had lost, 13 plus relatives in one night in Gaza, and we asked Allah Azza wa Jal to accept them as martyrs. And I remember sitting with him and saying, Insha'Allah, the people of Gaza will be victorious. And he looked at me like, man, you're tripping. He said, Inshallah, they'll be victorious? He said, who said they're not victorious? Mm-hmm. They're already victorious. There's not a house in the world except it's talking about Gaza. It's hearing about Gaza. It's knowing about Gaza. It is becoming more aware of the struggles of our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Then he said, and as for the martyrs, they're in Jannah. And as for those who are struggling, they are being rewarded for every moment that they are struggling. He says, that sounds like a victory to me. What does victory look like to you? And he just put me on the spot like that. Mm-hmm. And it really was a moment that kind of like silenced that noise around and said, this is what we want to happen. This is what justice looks like. This is what freedom is. And all of these kind of, like, as you said, Shaykh, like our subconscious programming of what it means.
Utopias, all
yes,
of
them. Yeah. And so I think this leads me to our next question, Shaykh, which is in our community, working towards that goal, helping people to know Allah and inviting them to choose to live a life that's pleasing to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. In a world that is full of injustice of all forms, we talked about here in Chicago, across America, we have...
But can I interject one
Yes,
thing?
yeah, please.
The world has always been full of injustice.
Allahu Akbar.
It wasn't in the time of the Prophet. Where do we get this notion from?
Our time.
Who taught us that this is supposed to be Jannah? Mm. Who taught us that? Mm. Where do we get that from? It's always been filled with injustice. Our job is to execute the mission of trying to establish a communal order that makes us shuhada ala nas. And that's it. The ultimate success or victory of that's up to Allah. But the idea that our goal is to produce a world where there's absolutely no injustice, no pain, no suffering, where? And this is a function of the utopias that we were taught by the Enlightenment coming out of the 18th century. And all of us, we're just full of that. We got sometimes good communities. Good communities. Let me just share this with you. What happened to Adam and Eve? They're in Jannah. They're where? Jannah. They have everything they could want. Right? La tara, la tashqa. They have everything they want. Iblis comes to them and tells them what? It ain't enough. You could have more. And what happens? Seeking that, they blow it. We are filled up with a lot of utopias as a function of which we don't even recognize the good that we have. We sacrifice the good for the perfect. We believe in some perfect. Who taught us that? Here I'm talking about. Here, in this life. All right? We need to capitalize on recognizing the good that we have and build on that. And we go from good to better. Good to better. And in this world, there will always be room for improvement. This will never be perfect to the point that it cannot stand improvement. That is the definition of Jannah. And so if we calm down a little bit, all right, and not think that every time we come to bat, we have to hit a grand slam, all right, then maybe we can get some base hits and make some progress.
Shaykh, and a part of it, Jazakumullah anna khairan, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and accept from you, allow us to benefit from your knowledge. A part of it is that sometimes when we're on this mission, we have this mission, let people know Allah, let people love Allah, let people submit to Allah. A lot of times in navigating these situations, we are driven for causes. The cause of those who are hungry, those who are driven out of their homes. And sometimes we find ourselves struggling with allyship.
Yes.
And that topic of allyship, particularly for the activists or even just for your average, no Muslim is average, right? Because every Muslim is a treasure. As the Prophet ﷺ taught us, an-nasu ma'adin, people are treasures. Everyone has treasure inside of them. But at the same time, even you're a Muslim who's just trying to live his day-to-day life and is seeing all of these people standing up for causes that are important to us, that are beneficial to us. Shaykh, what does it look like to navigate allyship and partnership with people of all walks of life and all backgrounds, and how can we do so in a way that doesn't stray us away from the actual mission that we have?
Well, I'm not so worried. I think I'm not so worried about allyship straying us away from our actual mission if we actually have a mission. What I do worry about is allyship costing us something in terms of the integrity of Islam itself. And so for me, the real challenge, something I think a lot about, is how we go into those allyships in the same way that the Prophet ﷺ went into those allyships without compromising anything fundamental to Islam. There are all kinds of compromises that we can make around the edges. But in terms of fundamental values, fundamental virtues of Islam, how do we enter into these allyships, all right, without compromising that? And I think, quite frankly, the first step is to be very clear and explicit about what it is that we're not willing to compromise. Oftentimes, I was telling some of the Alim students, when I used to go to the interfaith meetings and things like that. I mean, and I'm not against interfaith meetings at all. I don't want to give that impression, but I did notice that there was this subtle undercurrent of, okay, this is what we're willing to give up to engage in interfaith dialogue with you. What are you willing to give up to engage in interfaith dialogue with us? And my attitude was always nothing. If I have to give up something, then that's not interfaith dialogue. Because I'm here as a Muslim, and I have to be here as a Muslim. And if I can't be here as a Muslim, that's not really interfaith dialogue. And I think that oftentimes, when we are sincere and confident, not reactionary, all right, just clear about what we stand for, and if we do that consistently enough, people will come to understand what it is that we stand for. I'll tell you a true story. This is a true story. I remember when I was in college, and the secretary came to me and said, "You have to come to the end of semester Christmas party." It's not a Christmas party, really. It's just the end of the semester. So you have to come to the end of semester party. And just for you, we're not having any alcohol. I had never said anything to them about that. I just wouldn't go. I just wouldn't go. They decided we want him here. So for him to come, we can have this.
Allah.
And so I think that we just have to be a little more confident. And it's not about, sometimes the more strident you are, the more you reflect a lack of confidence. You follow what I'm saying? Just be confident. I'm not trying to impose anything on you. I'm not worried about you imposing anything on me. But if I'm going to be here, I have to be here as who I am. Just like you want to be here as who you are. And the whole point of our coming together is how we figure out how we do this. Right. Because ultimately, the reason that we're coming together is we recognize something, some interest that we have in common. And so we want to be together in order to pursue that interest. But I have to be me to be with you.
Right.
So that to me represents the real challenge. Having non-Muslim allies, this goes back to the very beginning of Islam. There never was a time when the Prophet didn't have non-Muslim allies. Starting with Bani Hashim and his uncle Abu Talib. He always had non-Muslim allies. The question is, worship our God one day and we'll worship yours one day. Nope, can't do it. Right? Okay? Stop preaching this Islam. Nope, can't do it. Right?
There's lines.
They're lines. They're lines.
And that's why, Shaykh, you referenced, Dr. Jackson, the verse that the brother recited. People get a little bit uncomfortable with Muhammadur Rasulullah وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ.
Of course.
When that's what أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ are firm with the disbelievers, it's not firm in a human context. It's firm in a sense of I'm firm in knowing what I am and firm in knowing what I'm not. لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ.
But I'll go even farther than that. I mean, just like I don't think that we can expect to be able to pursue our dignified existence as a Muslim community without sacrifice, I don't think that we should be imagining that we will live in existence with no enemies. And we should not fool ourselves in that regard. And one of the things that we should perhaps remember is that enemies are not all bad.
Right.
Enemies keep you sharp. Enemies keep you aware of what you stand for. And sometimes if you don't have any enemies, it may be because you don't stand for anything. But if we're going to stand for Islam, not everybody's going to like that. Islam is not everyoneism. Not everyone's going to agree with us. All right?
And that's okay.
And that's okay. Because, love and hate are not your only two options. Just because I don't love you doesn't mean I have to hate you. All right? All right? I mean, the Prophet had non-Muslim allies. All right? That didn't necessarily love, but he didn't hate them.
Right.
We can have cordial relations with all kinds of people. All we need to do is to be able to do that as Muslims. And we've done that for 1,400 years.
Right.
That's not our problem. And that goes all the way back to the beginning with our Prophet. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Jazakumullah khairan, Dr. I feel like we could go till Isha very easily. But I do want to give the opportunity for our community, with your permission, Dr. Jackson, to benefit from your presence as well. I just want to comment, Dr. Jackson, believe it or not, is older than me, and yet he's traveled all the way here and left his family. He's come all the way here. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless his family. I asked him, Shaykh, how are you holding up? How are you doing? He said he's just excited to go home and rest. He said sleep for a week. Needless to say, I'd be surprised if he slept for a few hours, but we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless the Shaykh and preserve him and to allow us to continue to benefit from him. Beloved community members, this is our opportunity to ask questions to the Shaykh, inshallah ta'ala. Typically, I would love for us to have a link so that I can personally filter through them, so that we can make the most of benefiting from it. But given that this is just an informal family conversation, we'll open it up and we'll just take the questions as they come, and we'll try to take as many of them as we can, inshallah ta'ala. Questions that folks may have, inshallah ta'ala. If we want to try to keep it generally within the realm of the topic, inshallah ta'ala, but also if there's anything else. Yes, Habibi.
Yeah.
I'll repeat the question as well, inshallah.
You were talking now. Now you're talking.
Now you're talking. It's a little tough now. Shaykh, if it's okay with you, I'll repeat the question. So the brother, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him, was saying, how do we, the Dr. Jackson highlighted this idea of starting like the mabda or the initial prism being looking at things through the prophetic legacy and through the prophetic light. Given that we have our pre-existing subconscious training of looking at things through a materialistic and worldly and even Western perspective, how can we deprogram and reprogram in a sense?
Let me just say one thing about the Western perspective. I use the term like Western perspective, but we should understand there's not one Western perspective.
Right.
All right? There's a dominant one, and then there are all kinds of others. Some of them having a lot more in common with us than they do the West itself. So right. I just wanted to get that out there. I think with regard to your question, the first thing we have to do is to want that. Right? The first thing we have to do is to want that. With regard to how, in terms of an Ipsy-Dixit blueprint, I don't know. I can't give you that, all right? But I can say this, that if we want that, and we want that as a community, the answers to how we get there come in motion. We get in motion, and it begins to reveal itself. Just like with the Prophet oftentimes, alayhi salatu wasalam, it wasn't quite clear how we're going to do this.
Right.
And we get in motion. All right? And our training and our instincts take over. And we have the benefit of the perspectives of our brothers and sisters, all right, to contribute to the clarity of our vision. So if we want that and we get in motion, I have no doubt that we can arrive there. And one of the things we need to be careful about, right? We don't want to use our deen as a club against each other. We don't want to do that. We want to come into spaces where our aim is to enhance the community. Not for me to be able to lord over you. We've been there, done that. Didn't work. So I don't know if we have, in some ways, you're asking me sort of, I've been married 30 years. So ask me, how you stay married 30 years?
I stay married for 30 years.
How do you stay married? I have no idea. No. In other words, I do, but nothing I could draw up for you. You follow what I'm saying? I've learned some instincts. I've learned some lessons from my Prophet. All right, and I'm in motion. And starting out where I said I think you should start out. I want to stay married. The value for me. Is that what I'm saying? If it's not, then you'll find any number of reasons, right? We need to want to begin with the prophetic example, the point of departure, as the former of our interpretive prism, in terms of how we look out at the world. And we want that to become a shared reality among us. A shared reality among us. And in that regard, if that becomes the case, just imagine the kinds of conversations we'll begin to have as compared to what we're having now.
Right. Jazakumullah khairan. Beautiful question, mashallah. Other questions? Yes, sister. Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Fighting up. Yeah, I think that quite frankly, one of the problems we have in terms of coming together, and this is not directed at you, sister. I'm just speaking in general, all right? But I think that oftentimes one of the problems that we have in coming together is that we don't understand what coming together is. All right? We don't understand the difference between unity and uniformity. All right? And because of that, every opposing view feels like disunity. All right? Not everybody's going to agree 100% on everything. And because, you know, I may say tomato, you may say tomato, it doesn't mean that we're divided. All right? But if I think that tomato is the only way to go, I might see you as an enemy. That's what's happening. And in point of fact, when you talk about fiqh, I mean, there is so much leeway. I mean, this is our claim to fame as a religious community. We were the religion that was able to deal, all right, with diversity and difference of opinion as a religious community. The West had to become secular before they could do that. 4 methods? And how many differences within those methods? All of them recognized orthodox. All of them recognized we can come together. Once again, we have to begin to approach these things from our own prism. Oftentimes when we come together to discuss our issues, that's what we're looking for. That one single ipsy dixit answer. And when people ask me, how do we, that's what they want. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. And I think that whatever it is that we're pursuing, it comes in motion. All right? But it's those extra prayers at night. It's those extra days of fasting. It's that extra charity that trains our souls, all right, to be able to get in motion in a manner that our instincts kick in, all right, and help light the way.
Inshallah, beautiful. Jazakumullah khairan, Shaykh. Other questions that folks may have for Dr. Jackson? Yes, brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. What do you mean? You know, quite frankly, brother, I don't know this to be the case because I'm not here in Chicago. I mean, I don't see any impediment to the development of those kinds of things. I think that, you know, no community, no single community can do everything. And I just think that sometimes different communities have different priorities. I mean, but I will say this, and this is one of the points that I was going to make about, you know, prophetic advocacy. I think that if we're going to have a mission that is about trying to establish for the people a proper relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to recognize one thing. You cannot guide the people you don't care for.
Allah.
It won't work. They will know it. The Prophet loved his people and they knew it. They even trusted him. That's something that we're going to have to work on. Despite all the stuff that's going on. All right? And one of the things that we should not do, we should not mistake governments for peoples. We should not mistake the policies of a government for a whole people. There's lots of fair-minded Americans out there, if they know the facts. All right? We cannot allow ourselves to be blinded to that. Because if we are, we end up resenting the whole people. And if we resent the whole people, you can't guide the people you don't care about. It's just that simple.
Dr. Jackson, you reminded me of the ayah, فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَىٰ آثَارِهِمْ إِن لَّمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. Used to tear the Prophet up on the inside, seeing his people being in this state. And subhanAllah, just thinking about the love that he had for his people in the battle, in one of the battles, They were fighting him, trying to take his life, and he was making dua for them. Like that's the love that the Prophet ﷺ had for his people. Jazakallahu khairan.
Wallahi, I just want to say one thing.
Please.
See, just that insight alone, the greatness of this man, the greatness of this example, where do you see that? Where do you see that? Why should I apologize then for being a Muslim if I can make that known to them? That's part of the challenge that we have, making ourselves known. Not reactionary, sometimes when we give da'wah, we're really trying to convince ourselves instead of convincing them. All right? But people who are confident, who have big hearts, when you have a big heart, it emotes.
Right.
People know it. Right? When you don't have complexes, when you're not insecure, all right? You emote that, all right? When we can carry that kind of confidence, people get it. Trust me, people get it, right? So I don't see any impediment to those kinds of things. But to me, the biggest institution that we need to work on, before all of that, we need to work on the institution of establishing civil conversations among ourselves. Our very conversations tend to tear us apart. And that leaves us as a community. We're all suffering from internal bleeding inflicted by ourselves. And that's part of what we have to heal. We have to find a way out of that. Because as long as we're in that, we won't get all that we have to get out of our communities. Too many people will either feel that they can't speak, or there's too high a price to speak, or they're not heard when they speak. We need to have civil conversations, all right, that really allow us to take full advantage of all the talent and all the skill and all the insight that Allah has placed in our community.
Jackson, you reminded me, subhanAllah, like the need to be good to people. Just be kind to people.
Including ourselves.
Right.
Sometimes we want to go out there and be so kind, and we're not kind to ourselves.
They accused the Prophet ﷺ of many things. They never accused him of being bad to his family. They attacked him in many ways. But at no point of time did they say that he ﷺ was anything other than a good father, anything other than an amazing husband, anything other than the most trusted business person in his community and civil servant. Those were parts of him that were untouchable because that was the track record of who he was, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Jazakumullahu khairan, Shaykhna. Other question? We have a written question. Allahu Akbar.
That means it's a hard one.
That means it's a long one, Shaykh. It seems like it says, Shaykh, I'm your biggest fan. No, I'm just joking. It says, Assalamu alaikum. As an African American convert who has recently moved back to Chicago, welcome back home to Chicago Sharif. I lack, I'm trying to read this, I apologize for my own shortcomings, lack a strong black community of Muslims. How can we build or rebuild such communities without seeming tribal or separatist? Very good question, mashallah.
Yeah, I think that, here again is an example of something that we get from our prophetic legacy. The Prophet ﷺ was from Quraysh. And within Quraysh, he was from Bani Hashim. All right? Bani Hashim had their own sense of identity as Bani Hashim. And Bani Hashim is not Bani Adi. And Bani Adi is not Bani Makhzum. And Bani Makhzum is not Bani Khuza'a. All right? So you had communities that identified with each other as communities. And in Jahiliyyah, that could lead to wars. Bani Hashim against Bani Adi. Quraysh against Bani Khuza'a. That could lead to wars. In Islam, we don't have to get rid of our identities. We simply have to domesticate them. In other words, I'm a black American. Shit.
Palestinian.
He has no interest in being anything other than that. I have no interest in being anything other than me. But Islam domesticates these identities for us. Those identities do not come at the expense of Islam.
Absolutely, that's beautiful. Shit.
You have your culture. I have mine. You have things you prefer. You like hot food? Spicy?
Of course.
No. I'm not feeling it. You follow what I'm saying? It's not one's better than the other. All right?
Preferences.
It's a preference.
Adwaq.
Preferences. But if you invite me to your home and you have hot food, and I know that by refusing that food, I will offend my brother, I will eat it. As part of my commitment to domesticating my preferences in the interest of Islam. And so we should not think that somehow, because we can tell ourselves that we are just Muslims. We have no ethnic identity. We have no racial identity. We have no class identity. We can tell ourselves that. The reality is, and it's going to come out. And it's going to come out. Islam does not require us to do that. We can be who we are. We simply domesticate. Does everybody understand what I mean by domesticate? No? Okay. You know when you have a wild dog, right? A wild dog is a very dangerous thing. But if you take that dog and you train it, you domesticate it, you teach it to control that wildness, all right? Then that dog can be something from which you benefit. A good hunting dog, a good guard dog. By the way, I'm mad at you, so relax. Huh? All right? A good guard dog. So when we domesticate our ethnic, our racial identities, all right? And we never invoke them at the expense of Islam, we're fine. We are a global ummah. A global ummah. I mean, sometimes we don't realize how beautiful this thing is. You know, non-Muslims see it sometimes. I mean, I remember, you know, traveling and, you're in the airport or something and, you got to make salat and they have one of these, spiritual rooms or whatever. And you go in the room, you've never seen anybody in that room before in your entire life. Everybody in the room knows what to do. One of us is assigned to lead the prayer. We all line up to lead the to make the prayer. We make the prayer. We say salam alaikum, and we never see them again in life. How? Non-Muslims look at this and say, "What? You know him? How are you praying with him? You don't even know him. How are you praying with him?" That's who we are. He's my brother in Islam. I don't have to know him. That's who we are as a Muslim community. And when we start trying to deny each other who we are, then what's going to happen is we're going to enter into these guerrilla wars underneath the surface. Because I'm going to try to make my culture the Islamic culture. And you're going to try to make your culture the Islamic culture.
Right.
All right? We have lots of Muslims. None of our cultures, none of our identities, none of our ethnicities, none of our race comes at the expense of Islam. Islam domesticates all of that.
Jazakumullah khairan, Shaykh. Thank you so much for your time, for being here with us, for honoring our community. Thank you all for joining us for our community night with Dr. Jackson in collaboration with Alim. There's so much more to learn about what Alim has to offer, and Alim is not only a place that or an organization that we can lean on, but it's also one that we should take an individual responsibility to support and to benefit from. So I invite all of our community members to find out more about Alim, learn more from our beloved Dr. Sherman Jackson. And of course, Shaykh Ubaidullah Evans is no stranger to our community. He as well is a part of Alim, and inshallah ta'ala we'll be hosting him as well many more times. With that, inshallah ta'ala, I'll hand it over to Brother Nadir. I know he has a long list of exciting announcements, and there is going to be coffee and food afterwards, inshallah. Take your time, Nadir.
Jazakallah khairan.